Hello everyone. Today we will be discussing module 1 of Spring Boot series, that is the Spring Fundamentals. And before we proceed with this module, I would like to share that you have some knowledge before beginning with this tutorial. That is Core Java, OOPS and Streams. Okay, Maven or Gradle, basic understanding of web technologies. However, if you have worked with Kotlin and you are quite comfortable with Kotlin, you can also proceed with this tutorial. So, yeah. So, yeah. So, what we gonna learn today? We will learn about what is a Spring Boot, difference between a Spring Boot and a Spring Framework, setting up a Spring Boot project, dependency management using Maven or Gradle, auto configuration and annotation Spring Boot application, configuration properties either by application.yaml or application.properties. Then we learn a bit about profiles, environment variable, okay, and how we can use profile. And at the end we will do some hands-on to get better understanding of our learning. Okay. Okay, Spring Boot. What is a Spring Boot? Okay, Spring Boot is a framework that make it easy to create stand-alone application, production-grade Spring-based application that you can just run. Okay, that is the best feature of Spring Boot. Okay, and in case you need some more information, then have a look at this link: github.com Spring Project Spring hyphen boot at slash wiki. You can get more information about the Spring Boot. Okay, so let's begin with the Spring Boot project. Okay, so first if you want to set up a Spring Boot project, first we have to go to Spring Initializer, then we add dependency, choose project management tool, then we choose Java version, Spring Boot version, and project. So something like this. I'll show you in an example. Okay, so here we got this page start.spring.io slash index.html project. Then we choose Maven because I work with Maven. But if you work with some other project management tool, then you could choose Gradle hyphen Groovy or Gradle hyphen Kotlin. Language Java, Kotlin, Groovy. I chose Java. Spring Boot version I chose 3.5.0. Okay, then I specified project metadata group com.techwala, artifact demo name demo project for Spring Boot, package name. Then I chose packaging as jar and Java version is Java 21. Okay, I chose dependencies as Spring Web, S2 database, Postgres, and Lombok. I will explain you why I chose two database. Okay, this is in-memory database and this is like a normal database, a relational database. So I will explain you why I chose two different databases. Then I click generate, and I will get something like this. Okay, and yeah, okay. So yeah, dependency management. We have got Maven. It is a build automation tool primarily used for Java-based project. It was developed to simplify build process and manage dependencies, project information, and build lifecycle. So Maven use project object model, which is an XML file, okay, pom.xml, that describe project configuration, dependencies, and build setting. Here I'll show you my pom.xml. Okay, so here we have parent tag, okay, and that is a Spring Framework 3.5.0. Then we specified this thing, this tag, okay. So here I said properties. Here we have got dependencies, so it is like it will automatically be created into a jar file. Okay, so here we have got different dependencies that I will just chose. Okay, and then we have got a plugin. It's a Apache Maven plugin, and then Spring Framework boot, spring.org.springframework.boot, Spring Boot Maven plugin. Okay, so yeah, so to start a Spring Boot application, we can use this command maven clean spring hyphen boot colon run, then we can get something like this. Okay, so Tomcat is started on 8080. So if you want to check, you can check it using this curl http. So it is not found, but it seems like there is a path available, like I show you. Okay, so I'm seeing white error label error page, but Spring Boot application has just started. Okay, I will also remove this error page, but that is out of the scope of our tutorial today. Okay, okay, so yeah. Gradle. So Gradle is a powerful automation tool used for multi-language software. So suppose you are using Kotlin. In that case, you could also use Gradle. I don't think Maven can work with Kotlin. Okay, I'm not sure about it, so I won't say. I won't make any comment on it. Okay. So for Gradle documentation, you can have a look at this link, doc.gradles.org. You can get access to Gradle documentation, and for Maven, you can have a look at maven.apache.org. What is Maven? Then you can get access to Maven documentation. Okay, auto configuration in Spring Boot is a powerful feature that simplify uh, the setup of Spring application by automatically configuring the necessary component based on dependencies present in the class path. Okay, this feature reduces the need for manual configuration and help developers get started quickly. Okay, so here we have key principles. Spring Boot auto configuration work by scanning the class path for a specific library, automatically configuring beans and setting up based on what it finds. Okay, so for example, Spring Boot find HSQL data, SSQL DB in the class path and no database connection are manually configured, then Spring Boot will automatically auto configure an in-memory database. To enable auto configuration, you need to add enable auto configuration or annotation Spring Boot application. So almost in every Spring Boot application, you will find this annotation. Okay. Okay, so to one of your to one of your configuration classes, these annotation trigger the auto configuration process. Okay, annotation Spring Boot application. Annotation Spring Boot application is a key feature in Spring Boot designed to simplify the configuration and setup of a Spring application. It is a composite annotation that combines three essential annotations: enable auto configuration, component scan, and component Spring Boot configuration. So enable auto configuration, this annotation enables Spring Boot auto configuration mechanism, which attempt to automatically configure your Spring application based on the jar dependencies you have added. If you have a Spring Boot starter web in your class path, the Spring Boot will automatically configure Tomcat and Spring MVC. So, okay, as Tomcat is a web server, so suppose you want to deploy your Spring Boot application to another server, for example, JBoss Wildfly. In that case, you just have to exclude Tomcat from your dependency and from Spring Boot starter web dependency, and you can create a WAR file you can generate a WAR file to deploy your application on JBoss, and perhaps you have to do some little bit more configuration. Okay, so component scan. Okay, this annotation enable component scanning, which allows Spring to automatically detect and register bean within the specified package and its subpackages. It is crucial for detecting classes annotated with component, service, repository, controller, and REST controller. Okay, and yeah, so controller is bit like old Spring annotation. Okay, but nowadays we use REST controller. Okay, and it is also important to have a good understanding of bean lifecycle that we will be covering in the next video, and Spring Boot annotation, Spring Boot configuration annotation. This annotation is a specialized form of configuration indicate that class can be used by Spring IOC container as a source of bean definition. It is typically used in conjunction with enable auto configuration and component scan. Okay, so it cannot be used alone. And Spring IOC container, it is one of the core concept of Spring, and we will be covering this very soon. Okay, IOC stands for inversion of control. Okay, now we have configuration properties. It can either be application.yaml or application.properties. Configuration properties annotation is a powerful tool for externalizing configuration and binding properties to Java object. This feature is particularly useful when dealing with hierarchical properties and nested configuration. To demonstrate how to use configuration properties with inner class, let's consider an example. So here we have configuration property, config properties, and we've got these fields, and we have got this. So this will be mapped to these fields, okay, with the help of Spring Boot and these annotations. To trigger it, we have to specify it like this, and rest we will show you in an example that we will do just now. Spring Boot will automatically bind these property to corresponding fields in config property classes and its credential classes. Now we discuss a bit about profiles. A Spring profile provide a way to segregate part of your application configuration and make them available only in certain environment. Okay, so for example, you have got some profile for dev, test, and prod, and all three profiles have three different environment. And with the help of this annotation, we can configure those environments. Okay, so profile annotation is used to map a bean into a particular profile. For example, if you have bean that should be active only in dev, you can annotate it like this. Okay, as I mentioned that I created two database, like I added two database dependency. One is H2 database, second is Postgres. So that I created because I want to show you an example of profile. Okay, this bean will only be present in the container during development. In production, dev will not be active. Okay, so if you have production profile, then dev profile will not be active. Okay, so it's time to begin with the hands-on. So we'll create first REST API, then we use this value configuration, and I will also create an example of profile for H2 for dev and test. And test, in test I will use H2, and dev I will use Postgres. Okay, so before you begin with hands-on, it's important to have Java 21 installed in your system, and some kind of IDE. I use IntelliJ. You could consider using some other IDE if you're comfortable with it. And for Postgres, you can directly use Postgres, or you could use some containerized Postgres. Okay, I will use Dockerized Postgres. Yeah, that is obviously containerized Postgres. Okay, containerized. Okay, and yeah, let's begin with the hands-on. Okay.